Let's take a look at the capabilities and benefits of the digital voltmeter, counter, and arbitrary waveform generator, which are standard and optional features on our next generation Infiniium EXR and MXR series oscilloscopes. To help save time, budget, and bench space, we have integrated some commonly used bench tools right into the oscilloscope. Using a separate hardware block, you have a 4-digit voltmeter and a 10-digit frequency counter behind the input channels with more accuracy and a simpler setup than any on-screen measurement. Note here how I am making an AC RMS measurement on channel 3 and a frequency measurement on channel 2, while neither channel is active on screen. Let's take a look at each menu for some more details. If we go to Measure DVM, you can see the setup couldn't be simpler. Just select an analog channel, a measurement type, and if you want it to auto-range or not. The channel doesn't need to be active, triggered on, or scaled properly, as this is no longer an oscilloscope-style voltage measurement based on acquired data. If we go to Measure Counter, you can see there is much more flexibility here. In fact, you have access to 3 counters at the same time. There are 2 10-digit general-purpose counters which can be assigned to any of the first 4 analog channels, which can measure frequency, period, or totalize between 5 and 10 digits of data. You can also show a ratio of the 2 counters. There's also a more basic trigger qualified counter, which is what you generally see on other oscilloscopes in the market. This is limited to counting and measuring the trigger circuitry up to 8 digits. The beauty of the standard DVM and counter is that you can use a spare analog channel to make basic voltage and frequency measurements with little to no extra setup on the oscilloscope, or screen real estate taken away from your more complex and interesting signals. The optional 50 MHz arbitrary waveform generator, or AWG, has a BNC output on the back and is controlled from the Setup Waveform Generator menu. We treat it as its own virtual instrument, so there's actually a dedicated default setup key for the AWG. Default setup of the oscilloscope does not default the AWG either, though a factory reset will. The Waveform tab lets you select a waveform type and control the settings related to that waveform, including adding artificial noise to the signal. The Output tab lets you adjust the load between 50 ohm and high Z, invert the output, and for many wave shapes, output as a single shot instead of the usual repetitive output. Modulation lets you add and configure amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, and frequency shift keying on qualifying wave shapes. If we check the arbitrary mode, you'll find an edit button appears. This brings up a comprehensive on-screen waveform editor and lets you create arbitrary waveforms from scratch, up to 122,000 points. Or you can edit waveforms that you capture and import from an analog channel, or from a saved CSV file. Check the description for a link to a complete tutorial of the Edit Waveform tool. Finally, make sure to check out the rest of the series, highlighting our new capabilities in our next generation platforms, linked in the description below.